What up, world? Waxvillain, Seattle, Washington. You already know what it is. Welcome to Waxvillain Fireside Chat. We got Matt Early, Gotta Groove Records in the building. Keep it locked. We'll kick things off soon. I see you, Lala. Appreciate you. I see you, Elaine. Appreciate you. Designer Dreams in the house. Mama in the building. What up, Walt Gear? I see it. Gotta Groove Records. If you got a turntable, I'll get you a copy. I can connect you all. That's Chris Lujan and Andre Cruz, two of the baddest men on the indie soul scene, man. Appreciate you, Elaine. Gotta Groove Records is in the building. Hey, how's it going, Matt?
Good, how you doing?
Good, good. See, we got about 6 on the line. We'll give it another tick. How's the weather in Ohio?
It's actually unseasonably warm today, but it's been raining all day. But
okay.
Today, low 60s, which is perfect for February in Ohio.
So last night, I was looking out the window and it started to hail. I'm in Seattle, Washington. We got snow last night.
Wow.
30 degrees today.
Well, it's coming back to us. Probably in the next 24 hours, there'll be snow on the ground here. It's just how it goes.
Yeah. I see we have about 19, 20 on the line. If you're ready, I'll go ahead and kick things off.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to welcome everybody to Waxvillain Fireside Chat. Fireside Chats are similar to interviews. However, we take the time to do the research so that we're not duplicating efforts, but supporting and strengthening other existing articles out there. We got about 8 questions, show and tell, the lightning round. I am so excited, folks. Tonight, we are joined by Matt Early of Gotta Groove Records. He is the president of marketing and sales, as well as the co-founder. Now, I want to start off by saying I've done close to 70 plus live stream interviews. 68 of the guests have been musicians. The other 2 in 2022, one being an artist, the other being Matt, is incredibly important. One of the things when I first started out, my mission, it was to make sure that we were shining the light on key players in the scene, their work, so that we could celebrate that. Because I think, in addition to the musicians, it's the artists that are designing the album covers, the folks that are at the plants making sure that the vinyl that comes to our home is high quality, it looks nice. When I think back to Matt's story, music was something that was always part of his life, growing up, dabbling into his parents' records and putting them on the Fisher-Price turntable, to learning the piano and playing that for many, many years as a student, all the way up to when he got his first gig at a record store, which was Finders. That evolved into Campus Records, which was a wholesale distribution group. From there, in the future, we get Gotta Groove Records. Matt, I am so happy to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to first start off with just having you tell everyone your name, where you're from, and what your role is with Gotta Groove Records, and kind of give us a sneak peek into the day-to-day.
Sure. So I'm Matt Early. Originally, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, but I actually live in Columbus, Ohio now. And I'm president of Gotta Groove Records as of almost a year ago now. Vince Sluzars, who was actually the original owner of Gotta Groove, he divested his interest in the business to both me and his son, Vince Jr., about a year ago. So since then, I've taken on a new title, but really the day-to-day is kind of the same. I work with customers directly and, kind of project management / sales / marketing.
Okay. I got to ask, what's your favorite part of the job?
Favorite part of the job is not knowing exactly what's going to happen going into each day. Every day is a new adventure, and it could be good, it could be bad, but it's the nice thing is it's never the same.
I like that too. That's important. So as I mentioned, Gotta Groove opens the doors in 2009. When you look back, What are the milestone moments that stand out most to you? And I would love it if you could kind of tell us the story about the day that you called the pressing plant, New Jersey.
Yeah, so it was actually 2008 when I
Okay.
got the grand idea that I wanted to start a pressing plant. And so I was calling around the country trying to find anybody who would sell me any kind of pressing machines or anything, really. I just had no idea about the business at that point. And I happened to call a company called Dynamic Sun in New Jersey. And they told me that they had just sold everything to someone in Ohio the day before I called. Wouldn't tell me who it was. Said it was somebody in Ohio and they were investors. So I spent the next 24 hours or so on the Ohio Secretary of State website just looking for any new business filings with the word records in the name. So I
Mhm.
wanted to figure out who the person was. And eventually tracked down Vince and contacted him through LinkedIn and just said, hey, I'm looking to do the same thing. Maybe we should talk. And the rest is history, I guess you could say.
Was he hesitant at all? I mean, just a random cold call. Some guy knows he got all this equipment kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, we met for lunch the week after I had reached out to him, and we didn't decide right then and there that we were going to go into business together. In fact, I think it took a good 6 to 8 months of staying in touch and just kind of loosely talking here and there before we finally decided, okay, let's try this out.
Okay. Okay. Now, I don't want to make it sound like this was kind of a easy, lucky thing where you just happened to pick up a call and you got it. You actually spent a lot of time trying to find the equipment. Can you just talk about some of the challenges and obstacles that you experienced prior to connecting?
Well, sure. I mean, really, similar to if you called around to pressing plants today and asked them, hey, do you got anything to sell? They're going to either not answer your call, not return your call or email, or say no. So, yeah, I got a lot of no's. I got a lot of, what are you even thinking? This is crazy. And yeah, I got told not to do it, by several people in the business that said, look, you don't want to get in this business. So just take my advice and stay out, And it's funny because every now and then I kind of use that same advice with people.
Do you still talk to the people that told you no? Are they in the game? Do you know them still or no?
Um, yeah, well, one of them I loosely stay in touch with. He lives in another country. But no, I mean, a lot of the people I was reaching out to then, either they're not in the business any longer, or we've just haven't really kept in touch.
Sure, sure. So I want to get granular for a second. I mean, all of us know that records come from a plant, but what does that really mean? Can you tell us what it looks like from start to finish, for an operation when you're maybe pressing a record for a label or a group?
Yeah, sure. So actually, the first steps start outside of a plant, and it's the audio. It's the cutting of the lacquer, the original disc that is the first embodiment of grooves on any kind of physical medium. And that happens in more of a studio setting.
Okay.
It's done on a cutting lathe and complete opposite type of environment than a pressing plant. So very quiet, very recording studio-ish,
Okay.
lots of electronics. And so basically, our guys, Clint Holly and Dave Polster, their name, they go by the name Well Made Music is their studio.
Okay.
And they cut all of our lacquers and then ship those off to the plating facility. And that's sort of what begins the actual manufacturing process. So in the plating facility, it's what's called electroplating or electroforming, and you're literally growing a layer of nickel over that lacquer that you cut. And there's a few other steps involved, but basically what you wind up with is the stamper, which is the mold that gets mounted to a pressing machine, and that's what stamps the grooves or presses the grooves into each record. And so, the labels get printed by a big printing press, and they get die cut. A lot of people think that labels have adhesive on the back of them, but they don't. They actually get pressed into the record. But yeah, the rest of the process is all manufacturing. A lot of it done by hand, a lot of hand assembly involved, and just a lot of human intervention.
Okay. Something I read was that when you had first started out, there were people actually flying out to kind of help you get started and so on like that. And working at a plant isn't something where you just fill out an application and you get the job. Can you talk about who the players are that are doing the work at Gotta Groove and just kind of tell us what exactly they're doing that requires
Yeah,
that experience and skill?
yeah, yeah, and really, we're blessed in that most of our employees have been with us for a very long time, or at least the supervisors have, and a lot of the other folks have been with us since the beginning. So there's a few different departments. The pressing department, obviously, that's pressing records, and Heath Gamooks oversees that. You might know Heath from Wax Mage Records is his
Yeah,
label, so
yeah.
a lot of people are familiar with the work he does. So, that's where the actual records are getting pressed. And we have 8 machines. There's pressing operators that oversee 2 machines per person most of the time, sometimes more than that. And they're actually running machines, getting the records pressed. And meanwhile, there's a team of people led by a guy named Tim Thornton, who actually was also with us from the very beginning. And that's the QA department. And so one of the unique things about us is we have a QA person per 2 presses. So we have 4 QA rooms. It's set up with turntables, and basically the person that's operating in there is just listening to records during the whole shift. Not in like a normal way of listening to records. Most time it's sped up so they can get through as many copies as possible.
Oh, wow.
Looking for defects that might be present in the records that are being brought to them from the pressing floor. And so, if something comes up where they have to stop the press, there's a lot of communication going back and forth between the pressing department and the QA department, whether they need to stop a press, change stampers out, whether it's just some sort of a more minor adjustment, whatever it might be, they figure out what's going to make this record sound the best way it can. And so the records that get passed then ultimately go to the assembly department. And that's overseen by Chris Smith's, the main guy that oversees it, but there's a couple other guys, Greg and Jamie, they keep track of inventory. And the assembly department is very manual. It's all humans inserting records into sleeves, inserting them into jackets. Even the shrink wrap machine, it's a machine, but there's a lot of hands-on involvement in making that machine work and passing the records through it. So meanwhile, they're inspecting things, and if there's any visual defects, whether it's in the print or in the pressed records, they're calling it to someone's attention. So, that's if I can accentuate nothing more, it's that it's just a very human endeavor in making records. There's a lot that goes into it, and a lot of it takes an army really to make good records.
Sure. Let me ask you this question. So a lot of the releases I see on the indie scene, 300, 500, maybe 1,000 pressed. If we're talking DJ and the indications, it was 5,000 pressed. What does the turnaround time look like? What is the total level of effort from the time that you start working on a release to the shrink wrap is done? What does that look like?
Well, okay, so from a purely process standpoint, I would say the amount of work that goes into like a 500 copy order adds up to about 4 days worth of work.
Okay.
But those 4 days are spread out over the course of many months. Now it's spread out over the course of a lot more months than it ever has been before.
Yeah.
But there's just, there's a lot of moving parts in putting a record together. So it's like you couldn't possibly do each one of those steps day after day after day for the same record and actually make it happen that fast. It would be amazing if you could, but it just haven't figured out a way to do that yet.
Sure. No, that's super helpful. And that kind of is a great segue into the next question. And this is something that me, my friends, everyone on the scene have been hearing for, it seems like a year. The words vinyl delay. Oh, it's going to take a long time. Oh, it'll be a year before you see this record. We've heard so many different versions of the truth. I thought it would be fantastic to get your perspective on it and maybe have you shine the light on what's actually going on to kind of help us fans, set expectations for these releases that we know are coming out or that we're waiting on and things like that.
Yeah, so it's been an evolving thing since the beginning of the pandemic, really. Obviously, back in early 2020, a lot of pressing plants, including us, we had to close down for 8 or more weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
There's a special guest cameo. Keep going.
So there was that aspect that for a period of time just couldn't make any records, and then you had the backlog before you closed down, and then you had more of a backlog when you opened up. Then, there were all kinds of legitimate supply issues over the past year and a half, whether it's, the actual vinyl itself. There's been here or there issues. I hear it's more of a problem in Europe in terms of the sourcing of the vinyl than it is in the US. Our suppliers actually been pretty consistent throughout. But boxes and label paper. I mean, I just found out today that my label paper that was the replacement for the replacement label paper 2 years ago is no longer going to be made, and I got to find another replacement. So it's like stuff like that certainly does continue to affect things. But I think at this point, it is so many people have been making records for the past 2 years, have been forced to become so uber organized now that they're planning way farther in advance than they ever did before the pandemic. I mean, I have plenty of customers that have already booked orders for us for records that aren't even recorded yet. And so, when you have that layer of, or that level of planning, I don't know when the turnaround is going to get back to normal if people continue to plan that far out in advance. It's sort of a double-edged sword. It's great that people are planning better than they used to, but at the same time, it's a detriment to those who just haven't figured out that they have to plan that way yet.
Right. That's really interesting. Have you noticed lead times maybe reducing a little bit? I've kind of heard that folks weren't expecting records and now all of a sudden they got them early. Have you noticed any changes with that in terms of the lead time?
I mean, not yet. I'm hopeful that's going to happen. A big thing that gives me some hope that's going to happen is we added a third shift at the end of last year. It didn't even exist prior to September of last year. So it just makes sense that third shift is going to have an impact on things at some point this year.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just so hard to predict when that's going to be. So I'm still, when I talk to people about turnaround, I'm still telling them as if that third shift doesn't exist.
Sure.
Because it hasn't been around long enough yet for us to feel it.
Wow. Okay. All right. So, I remember when I started collecting, and I remember reading in the article where you said, the reason that vinyl wasn't such a popular thing before is because the labels that owned it, they weren't issuing it, right? They weren't making copies available. And that kind of, inspired you to say, why don't I just go and make more records, right? Address the problem, which I thought was, fascinating. But what I'd really love to know is, reflecting back, did you see vinyl kind of blowing up the way it has and kind of continue to just keep rising and rising and rising?
Well, yes, to some degree. I felt like it was untapped potential from, when I got into the actual like wholesale side of things. It was the year 2000. And that company you mentioned earlier, Campus Records, owned by a guy named Jim Dawson, that, he believed in vinyl, and the indie stores that we sold to wanted more of it. I remember when there was this Jimi Hendrix box that came out as a purple box, must have been around 2002-ish. And I think we bought 800 copies, which was 80% of the entire production run. And that was a box set vinyl in the year 2002. The label thought we were crazy. I mean, I think Jim had to sign like a bunch of extra paperwork just to get the credit to be able to buy them. And we wound up selling out of them. And,
Wow.
I remember thinking, well, geez, that was like a 6 LP box set. Imagine if we could just, make these Miles Davis single records, how many people would be buying them? Because even back then, it was hard to get like just your pretty much typical Miles Davis catalog title,
Wow.
And it just seemed like, somebody's missing something here. So I thought that at some point that would reverse itself. The part that I couldn't predict is the fact that big boxes are jumping into it now.
Yeah.
The fact that Walmart's selling vinyl, that blows my mind. I really never would have predicted that in a million years, because it's non-returnable,
Mm-hmm. Do you think seeing big boxes like your Walmarts, your Targets, your Amazons pushing, the limited color vinyl, does that help or hurt?
I think it does both, but it probably helps a little bit more than it hurts, in the
Okay.
sense that I think it does introduce a generation or a consumer base to the format that might not otherwise have been introduced to it. When you're first starting out into something and you don't know anything about it, if it's hard to get, or if you feel a little bit nervous to go into a record store because you don't know anything about records, then you're probably going to pass on it unless it's really easy for you to get. So if it's really easy to go get a Taylor Swift record, at Target, then you're introduced to the format, and then maybe a year down the road, your tastes evolve, and you walk into that record store that you were nervous to go into a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I'm always interested in fads and trends. From your perspective, right? Being in, founding Got a Groove and everything like that. What trends have you seen stay, go, and what's on the rise? What should we look out for next?
I don't know if I've seen any trends go yet, because we've been doing it. We're still a relatively young company, I guess you could say. But yeah, trends in terms of quantities increasing. I mean, a lot of we're blessed by having customers who have been with us for a very long time, and they've sort of we've grown with them. So a lot of these, like Coal Mine Records is a perfect example. When they first came on with us, they were doing 500 to 1,000 copies, and now it's like 2,000 to 3,000 is about the minimum they're going to do.
Right.
So, I definitely, the quantities that people are doing have been going up, and they continue to. And then the color variants, especially since last year, it's just exploded. I mean, it's always been a thing of like maybe doing 2 variants, but now it's like 4, 5, 6, you name it. I mean, lots and lots of color variants for the same record. I don't know how long that trend is going to stay. I mean, I guess, as long as there's people wanting to do exclusive variants, like there's the MPs and the Newberries and whatnot, then they'll probably stick around.
Sure. So I actually love color variants, but all my friends want to remind me that it's inferior to black vinyl. I'd love for you to kind of weigh in on your takes between, let's say, OG black and color variants, but more importantly, I'd like to know at what point when, a customer comes to you and they say, hey, I want this out of control nebula space variant. At what point does the quality of sound, kind of get impacted through doing crazy things with variants?
Well, the super general answer is the more colors you mix together, the more likely it is you're going to hear something in the vinyl,
Okay.
But to back off of that, though, it's like most people, or a lot of people, don't necessarily care about that added noise that it might be. So you have to keep everything perspective of what kind of record is this. If this is like a quartet or a cello solo record, and somebody says I want to do splatter, I might say, well, that's going to look sweet, but is your fan base going to want that, or are they going to be expecting like drop a needle silence between the tracks? And so if that's the case, you might not want to do that splatter. But yeah, color vinyl, it's one of those things that's all in the ears of the beholder. So
yeah,
there's a ton of color records in the marketplace, and people aren't like abandoning them because they sound horrible. They sound fine for most people who listen to them. And in a lot of cases, like transparent colors, for example, for most records, you're not going to hear a difference between black and transparent unless you're really looking for it. And most of the time, people aren't going to buy more than one copy to compare against each other and try and find that defect. They're going to buy one copy and either love it or not love it.
Sure. What goes into the process when you are making, say, splatter versus smoke versus, say, wax mage? And then I've kind of heard like the new term hand-poured records. Could you talk a little bit about that, but maybe let us know how each of those variants, the process might be different, if it is at all?
Yeah. So smoke or swirl, that is what I call a machine run variant. So that means there's very little human intervention in making the records turn out appearance-wise the way they do. I mean, there's a little bit of adjustments on like the nozzle temperatures and how much vinyl you put into the hopper at the back of the machine. But beyond that, the colors are mixing themselves together inside the machine without some human hand involved. So yeah, a swirl or smoke turns out just by how the machine spits it out.
Okay.
Splatter records, you literally have a human person standing there and sprinkling pellets of vinyl onto the stampers and then manually closing them. And so you have a lot more control over the color variation and the proportions of different colors and how it's going to out from the center versus come in from the edges. So yeah, it's definitely much more intricate, very hands-on. I call those handmade records.
Okay.
Hand pour, it's sort of a term of art that gets interchangeably used for all of the handmade different variants.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, wax mage, those are all handmade variants. So a nebula,
Mm.
there's proprietary things that Keith has come up with to do those patterns. But
Oh, wow.
what the same thing, or the thing that's similar with all of them, is it's at least one person, and in some cases more than one person, standing there next to the machine and doing all the work to make the colors turn out the way they do.
Okay. Is there ever, a time when somebody wanted, like I said, lots of colors? You went ahead, even though you warned them that, the quality might be impacted, and then it came out and it was subpar, or maybe it looked really cool. Any stories like that where you were surprised by what turned out?
Well, in appearance, yeah, we've been surprised by appearance plenty of times, both in a good way and a bad way. So usually, what happens is if we're surprised, whether it's sound quality or appearance, I just got to get a hold of the customer and get their call on it.
Okay.
It's not really my judgment call to make. There's been a couple situations where it's like, okay, hey, this color, it's causing noise in the lead out, but the rest of the side sounds fine. I'm going to send you a recording. Let me know what you think. And 50-50. Sometimes they say, no, let's go with a different color. 50% they say, let's just do it as is.
Okay. Okay. What's your take on the variants that actually have like liquid and water in them?
They're sweet, but we don't do them in our plant.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's more of a DIY thing. So,
Oh.
yeah, I have a few customers that'll order like clear vinyl copy with just side A pressed on into a blank side B, or just side B and a blank side A, and then they somehow stick the two sides together with the liquid in between.
Wow.
And I think it's sweet. I mean, yeah, it looks great. It's cool. Definitely not something you do in a factory setting, though.
Sure. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Now it's time for the show and tell. And one thing I want to shine the light on is, in addition to the plant stuff, you have also done some record label stuff as well. I think it was O Wax, roots based in Ohio. Can you talk a little bit about that? And do you have anything you can show us?
Yeah, so it kind of started as a bit of a hobby when we had some downtime. It was like, well, how can we fill this downtime? Why don't we, do some of our own records?
Mm.
So reissues are sometimes a little bit easier to do than new artists, at least when you're a pressing plant, not a real record label. So we got the idea of, okay, let's have this Ohio-focused record label.
Mm.
We the first one was a record by a Dayton, Ohio heavy metal group called Witch. They pressed 100 copies in 1985. We pressed 500, and they all sold out, and it was
Wow.
cool. It was fun.
Yeah.
So we got our feet wet doing that. The next one was Black Unity Trio, which I'm very proud of, because this record has a lot of historical context, and before we reissued it, it was just really highly sought after. And I knew that at least one of the guys still lived in Cleveland, Abdul, his name. But they had always been very elusive. They just weren't really interested in talking to anyone about reissuing the record. I don't really know why. We never really talked about why. But thankfully, they did have us reissue the record. And the crazy thing about it was, Yusuf's another one of the musicians in the group. He happened to be in town, and he and Abdul were sitting at Abdul's apartment watching this morning news show, one of those like morning coffee type news shows, that had just done a highlight on Got a Groove. And they called, or Abdul called, saying, hey, I want to put out 300 copies of this record that I made in 1969. Like, really? He's like, yeah, I want to bring the tapes by tomorrow, maybe. And, you don't get calls like that every day. So I'm like, what are the tapes? It's called Black Unity Trio. Like, what? I've been trying to get a hold of you guys for like 2 years. And he couldn't believe that. Like, somehow he had no idea that I was trying to reach him. And so, yeah, somehow I convinced them to let us take it on. And I think they've been happy with it. I mean, geez, we've sold like well over 3,000 copies of it at this point. And this is a record that when they put it out, they made 500 copies of it. So 50 years later, this spiritual jazz record is getting a whole second life and getting introduced to
Wow.
a generation. So yeah, I've been really proud of that. And then we just recently put out this record by Tom Wachunas called Fair Changes. Um, Sort of like an acid folk record. It's
Okay.
just very unique. And yeah, that one, he's from Columbus, Ohio. I think he put it out in 1975 when he first released it. So it's fun side project.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. When you did it for the very first time, what were the biggest lessons learned, or did you have enough support and know-how that you knew what you were doing?
On the production side, I pretty much knew what to do just from dealing with both bands and labels, on manufacturing. Um, Managing artist expectations, though, was
Mm,
certainly new game, and especially with the Black New Trio, there was a lot of communication involved that you just don't have when you're just contract manufacturing for someone else. When you're actually working with the artist on their baby, there's just a whole new level of communication. So I respect all of the labels out there that deal directly with artists because it's there's just a lot of communication involved.
sure. And where can we shop those records if we wanted to look for them after the show?
So we have a web store, gotagroovestore.com, and at this point they're in record stores pretty much anywhere as well too.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. So you've pressed well over 10,000 records. I love a good story. Is there a favorite release or just a really good feel-good moment about taking care of a customer that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, so the I guess there's two that stick out in my mind. One was back when we started, this guy named Gordon Withers. He's a cellist, and he wanted to do this solo cello rock record of Jawbreaker covers, and it was just extremely unique. But we had pressed some records before we got that order, but not many. I think he was probably number 10, and so not a lot of experience, but a very challenging record to press. I mean, even now, a cello solo record is going to be a harder record to press than like a heavy metal rock record. So he went with us in spite of that, and it did take a lot of trial and error, but we got the record to the point where he was very happy with it,
Mm,
and it was something that I was really proud of because it sort of felt like, okay, we're over the hump. We know how to make records now. I mean, little did I know all the challenges that we'd face for many years to come, but it was like the first time I was like, all right, I feel really good that we're onto something. We're figuring this stuff out. We can actually successfully make records. So that was 2010, and
mhm.
it's always stick out in my brain. Um, Years down the line, we worked with the video game company Bungie to put out the Destiny Volumes 1 and 2 soundtrack.
Okay.
And that was really fun because they called and they basically, look, we're a video game company. We don't really know anything about vinyl, but we just know we want this thing to be absolutely amazing, and we want it to be like audiophiles appreciate it, but so do any gamer that appreciates the fact that we put so much into it. Resources, sky's the limit. Do whatever you want to do with it. So it was, the timing was perfect because we had just come up with this new type of plating with our plating partner, Nipro Optics. We call it groove coated stampers, and it's a different type of plating, and to my knowledge, it's the first new type of plating technology in a very long time in record pressing. So I pitched it to them to say, hey, let's make this the groove coated release, the first official groove coated release. They wanted to do crazy stuff with the artwork, all kinds of foil stamping and just embossing, and it was just through the roof. So it was like more work than I had ever spent on a project, but it was so fun, and they loved it, and the people who bought it loved it. So that was very validating.
Sure.
That was 2018. So going from that 2010 of I feel good because we actually made it through this job and it sounds pretty good to 2018, it's like, wow, we really did kind of a masterpiece here. It's just great to see that sort of growth.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that Terry Cole said when he was on the live stream was not all records are created equally. I would love it if you could tell us what distinguishes Gotta Groove Records from the competition in the industry.
Yeah, well, we just spend a lot of extra time on quality control. So even before turnarounds got to where they are now, I mean, 2016, 2017, our turnaround averaged 3 to 4 months, which is about twice what most other pressing plants were at that point in time. And it wasn't because we were lazy. It was just that we have all of these extra steps in place, whether it's in the plating steps or in the test pressing steps. We fully listen to every test pressing and pass or fail it internally before sending it to a customer versus just, just shipping it out and waiting for feedback. And then, once it gets approval, we listen to about every 25th copy off of every press.
Wow.
And not all the way through, but like portions. You start one record where the last one stopped, and that's what the QA department operates under. They're constantly having a record playing as they're being pressed. And all that stuff just takes time. And if you discover defects, you have to fix them. Mm-hmm. And that takes time as well. So the drawback is, from a business, we definitely leave money on the table because it takes longer and we lose business because of that. But the flip side is I really do believe that the records we ship are the absolute best that records possibly can be. And I don't mean any ill will to any other pressing plant out there. I feel like we really do the best job that you can possibly do when you're making records.
I love that. And, I just want to co-sign on that. Every time I get a coal mine record or I see Got a Groove, I know the standard and the expectation because it's not a one-off. It's consistent and it's always routine. And I just thought it would be so cool to hear from you and all the friends that love coal mine records, Brewery Town Beats, your Chris Luhans and Andre Cruzes. We all see the Got a Groove stamp on it. So to be able to hear this stuff is absolutely fantastic. My last question for you. For those that are watching, that are interested, inspired by what you did, how does somebody follow a career path like you? How do they get into working in a vinyl plant? How does something like that start?
Well, working in a vinyl plant at this point, everybody's hiring. So, if you want to just go work in a vinyl plant, just go apply. I mean, it took us a year to fill all of our positions. So I know that there's other plants out there seeking good workers to put out good records. But yeah, if you want to start a pressing plant, that's a whole other game. You just buckle up because, expect the unexpected. Everything winds up, costing more than what you thought it would and take longer than what you thought it would. But at the end of the day, if you put out something that other people appreciate and you're proud of, then it's all worth it, really.
Yeah, yeah. If you didn't have a good relationship with Vince, what would you have done if the deal, the Jersey plant and all that stuff didn't work out? What was your plan? What was your plan B if you had one?
I still was going to open a plant. I don't think it would have ever been as big as what we've become. Really, I was thinking 1 or 2 machines, like a very small, I'd be running the show, doing everything kind of thing. So, to this day, I'm extremely gracious for the opportunity I got from Vince because it's beyond what I could have ever pulled off on my own. And, like I said earlier, it takes an army to make records. I mean, geez, we got 50 people or over 50 people working for us at this point. And that's what makes it work. It's not just one person.
I love that. I love that. All right. So we're going to go ahead and start the lightning round. These are our 10 quick questions. Answer as fast as you can. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
You got to sip real quick. I appreciate that. All right. LP or 45?
LP.
OG black or color variant?
I prefer black.
Last 45 or LP you bought?
It was Sam Gendel and Sam Wilkes, music for saxophone and bass guitar.
Okay. All right. Something you listen to that might surprise us?
Yacht rock.
I love yacht rock. Yes. Okay. All right. 3 records from your collection that get heavy spin.
Duran Jones, self-titled. Alton Keys, Proceed with Caution, and Dr. Dogface.
Okay. Okay. You walk into a record store. What's the first section you go to?
If they have it, I go to the used jazz section. I try to find something I've never heard of.
Okay. Okay, I like that. So will you go by album cover then? If you see a cool album cover, is that going to win your heart, or how does it work?
I mean, I'll start with, I might look for a particular label, like a Prestige or something, that I've heard, I know who they are, but I'll try and find an album that I've either not listened to, even if I do know the artist, or just something off the wall that I've never even heard of.
Okay. Tell us an indie label that you're digging that we should check out, and they can be from Ohio. It's okay.
Well, I'm actually going to mention one not from Ohio. It's Aloha Got Soul. It's a Hawaiian label. They put out amazing stuff. It's all, obviously it's all Hawaiian based. But yeah, and full disclosure, they are a customer of mine. But still, even if they weren't, I buy all their stuff.
Their variants are really cool looking. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. 3 record stores in Ohio we should check out if we visit.
So Finders, which is my alma mater.
Yeah.
At Plaid Room Records, definitely probably the best Ohio record store at this point. And then My Mind's Eye in Cleveland.
Okay. Now, I know that album covers is something that inspired you early on. Can you tell us 3 album covers that really move you, that you just love?
Yeah, so the first would probably have to be Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magic. And it's more because that's sort of the period in my life when I was listening to that album. It was when I started to really pay attention to music in a more mature way. So it's anytime, I always think of that cover, when I'm thinking of just records in general. So that would definitely be the first one. Probably Mothership Connection, Parliament.
Okay.
And then Sweet Trip. Sweet Trip, what is it? Velocity Design Comfort. It's got this really funky grid-looking artwork and spot gloss, and it's just over the top.
Very cool. Okay. For our last question, if you had a theme song, what would it be and why?
Theme song would probably have to be Working Man by Rush.
I love that. That's awesome. Very good. Oh, boy.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
No, as you say, it laments being a working man in the song, but it's like I love my job, so I'm a working man. I love it.
That's awesome, man. That takes us to the end of the Fireside Chat, the lightning round. I want to thank you again so much for coming through and giving us all this great information. Before we go, are there any words you want to say to anybody watching right now?
Just keep it on vinyl.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much. Have a fantastic night. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks. Take it easy.
Waxvillain, Seattle, Washington. We're out.